Good evening, everybody. We're going to talk about Natrium Sulph again. From part 2, I recently talked a little bit about Aries. I went a little bit deeper into this. And let's look into the Natrium Sulph terrain. And it's interesting. It's an interesting salt because a lot of people, and there's a big connection with the liver here. I mean, this is pretty obvious with this salt. Because I think in the previous video, I talked a lot about water metabolism, water in the blood, excess water in the blood that George W. Carey talks about that can give us chills, can also give us malaria in extreme cases. And so this is kind of expanding a little bit more on these ideas of how this salt functions, because I always use this for so many reasons in Chinese medicine. But, you know, we can clearly see that there's a massive liver function going on here with this salt. So, for starters, Taurus rules the throat, the thyroid. And interestingly enough, when we understand Chinese medicine, the liver meridian actually runs off and diverges up and runs up through the throat into what they call the point Bai Hui on top of the head. And people who have a lot of phlegm or phlegm congestion around the throat, there's a saying in Chinese medicine they call this plum pit throat or plum stone throat. It's almost like when you swallow, you feel a lump there, or you're constantly clearing your throat from phlegm. This is one of the indications for Nat Sulph. So this is a lot to do with qi regulation in Chinese medicine. So the liver likes movement. The liver likes to flow. It likes to disperse its energy. It likes to be relaxed. It doesn't like to feel caged. So when we feel stuck or psychologically stuck, whatever it is we're going through in life, our throats can be really affected. Now, and this can manifest in a number of ways, because I think when we look at medical astrology, we've got reflex zones. And what I mean by that is Taurus is going to connect to its opposite sign, Scorpio. And as an example how this can play out is, I guess, with the taboo subjects, like sexual problems, because Scorpio is ruled by Mars and Pluto. So if we're feeling pent up, or we're hiding, or we're repressing certain issues, can manifest in the throat. And funnily enough, also the sinus. And I think Natrium Sulph has a connection with the sinus as well. So this is an example of how these things can manifest. But I think in the previous video, I talked a lot about the pineal and the pituitary glands. And Inez Perry, when she follows up further on George W. Carey's work, she talks about the, I think I was talking about Neptune and the planet Uranus in connection to the pineal and pituitary. But the sun and the moon has a connection to those glands as well. Now, there's a connection going on here through the cerebrum and the lower part of the lumbar spine around L2. And so there's two nerves that connect to this. And this they call one the AD nerve. Forgive me if I'm pronouncing this wrong. This connects to Vedic medicine as well. Ayurvedic medicine, which is associated with the pituitary gland. And then we have the pengular nerve, which connects to the pineal. So there's a crossing point here. There's a meeting of these two glands, so to speak, via these nerve crossing, these meeting points, which Inez Perry expands on in the book. And what they mean by this crossing point, I guess, is what they refer to the Bible as the crucifixion. Now, because the place where Taurus begins is really the head. And so the nerves cross at the cerebrum and at the second lumbar vertebrae there. So this is what I was saying when Taurus up here around the neck and then the Scorpio connection down there as a reflex zone is an example of this, which I find fascinating. And of course, they'll say this place, this is like the crucifixion, right? And the crucifixion is really about the spirit to be crucified, and when they're talking about this kind of crucifixion in the Bible, they're talking about man's animal nature, so to speak, and the material side of life. So this crossing point where they talk about the Golgotha in the Bible, where Jesus was crucified, was actually means the skull, the head here. So there's a connection going on here with man's lower nature and man's higher wisdom. And there's this battle he needs to go through. And when this is the crucifixion we all go through, right, in life, where we got to, it's that kind of thing. There's this war within us between spiritual and intellectual enlightenment versus darkness and ignorance. So do we want to stay in our lower natures, or do we want to ascend and move up and think about higher consciousness? Is, I guess, a new age term. But we can look at it in a different way, is just maybe looking at reality. Are we actually perceiving the world are we looking through the lens? Are we still perceiving it through the lens of what we think reality is, when in actual fact it isn't? But so this salt, like I said, it's got a lot of connections to do with the liver and the liver function. And when the liver chi doesn't move, Ines Perry talks about motion. And I find this very fascinating because in Chinese medicine, we call it the free flow of chi, which is motion. The liver likes to have, spreads energy to every organ in the body. And Ines Perry just talks about it as motion. And she's saying that, you know, when we're pent up, obviously, then we just need to move emotion. Emotion just means motion. We need to move. So this is another thing that can probably connect to things like primal therapy, as in moving the emotion. When we're pent up, we need to go into it to move it. There's nothing real magical about That's actually the real essence of what's going around the internet now, shadow work. All it is okay, I'm feeling this certain feeling. How do I express it? Allow myself to go into it so I can actually move the emotion. And that's going to free up liver function, is what I'm trying to say, my long-winded expression here. So this salt is very, very interesting in relation to all this, because it's about expressing. And when the liver gets pent up, we either feel, it can be a number of ways, but a lot of it is psychological, because when we feel psychologically stuck, it's going to affect our liver function, because the liver likes freedom. It likes to move. I mean, think about it in the Aries season when spring comes in. And all of a sudden, in the winter, you know, you feel unmotivated, it's a very introverted time of the year. But as soon as spring comes, the wind picks up, right? I mean, and when the wind picks up, it stimulates the liver, and it makes you want to get out and do things. It's like, I want to go and explore life. I want to take it in. And I think one of the really, really interesting things I could say clinically about this salt would be a lot to do with antidepressants, which every man and his dog is on these things at the moment, which is really sad, but this is the way it is. And you know, clinically, I've seen it so many times. People come in, they've taken these things, or they're on them, and they find it difficult to get off, or they don't have the courage to get it off, these things. And this is one salt to consider, by the way, for this kind of thing too, because and anything that when this salt is greatly needed when there's excess water in the body, which these drugs do, right? They create a lot of water. They make the body feel heavy and damp. And when you go into hot, humid climates, you can't handle it. It's just like, oh my God, I want to get out of here. That's a classic indication of natrium sulph. But what I want to say is, the interesting thing about these drugs, so to speak, is that a lot of people can, when they get off them, they get these brain zaps, which is scary stuff, actually. But so God knows what these things are actually really doing to people. But it was, the reason I'm saying this is because in his Perry, as an indication for this, and I'm not sure if I mentioned this in part 1, but I have been administering the salts for these people who are experiencing this, but combined with acupuncture, of course, because I'm an acupuncturist and Chinese herbalist. But the interesting thing is that these salts, she said, these salts are for violent pains at the base of the brain. So when people are getting, and a lot of people in clinic have described to me, when they're on these things, they get these brain zaps that feel like they thump them in the back of the head, around the cerebrum area. So I find this interesting. And I think this is one reason for you practitioners out there, or people who are struggling, not that I can give medical advice on here, but I'm talking medicine. This is for entertainment purposes. But this is one of those salts you would consider. So I think it's very important to understand, I think with this one, particularly out of anything, is when people are feeling really pent up emotionally from being unable to express it authentically or in a comfortable environment, is going to make your liver feel pent up. So it's just one of the best salts for it. And it's interesting as well because sulfur, or sulfate, sulfur, in Chinese medicine has a lot of functions. I'm going to talk about this in when eventually I get my Patreon page, because there's so many things I need to cover here when it comes to this. But in a nutshell, sulfur supports cell permeabilities is another way of thinking about this, and also it is very good in general for nourishment and detoxification. So it's very yang in nature. So natrium sulph, sulfur, sulfate enters the liver meridian. So it can consolidates yang, which we need, yang, qi, and ming men, which translates to the life gate, to brighten the mind, to make our thoughts coherent. So, and it's incredibly good, which I mentioned for this salt as well, because that yang warming mechanism is very good for B syndrome, which is chronic joint pain and inflammation. So this salt as well is very good for regulating the liver and gallbladder. So the wood element again, gallbladder's yang, liver's yin. So they've got an interconnection there, and it's very good for people who have got poor fat metabolism and poor bile production, to help with these kind of digestive problems. But I just wanted to talk a little bit more about that in terms of this salt. And like all of them, they're just awesome. And I've been getting a lot of feedback from people, which is great. Actually, it's just great to know people are listening, because I don't really know. But secondly, it's really good just to get the feedback, because people obviously take this subject seriously, and it is a very good one for lay people just to try and get a grasp on these things, because this is the reason why I'm doing this, is because you can really help yourself a lot when you understand these salts. So I'm still chipping away on my book. It's kind of a little bit slow, but a lot of the stuff in my book I'm kind of covering here, but I'll expand on things a little bit more. I want to expand a little bit more into other astrological concepts further down the track. So a lot of them will be on the medical based stuff and the psychological. So stick around and I'll do a few more videos. And thanks again for listening, guys.